Today we're going to hear from a real hero of our Army Air Corps at the time. I think he's still wearing the uniform he wore back then. Our next speaker was a pilot in World War II flying P-40s, P-47s, and P-51s in combat in the Pacific with the 78th Fighter Squadron. He flew 19 long-range missions over Japan from Iwo Jima and flew on the last mission of World War II. Pretty significant. Through his involvement with the Spirit of 45 organization, which he'll tell us a little bit about today, I hope, he continues to promote the need to keep our warbirds maintained and flyable for future generations. Today he will talk about his service during the war, as well as his post-war experiences as a civilian coping with undiagnosed post-traumatic stress. Our speaker will make his presentation, and if time allows, we'll open up the session for questions. So please take the cards that you have in your chairs, and if you have a question, fill it out. We'll come around and pick it up, and we'll have a little Q&A at the end. Each of you should have a copy of Jerry's bio, but we're very pleased today to have him speak with us live. I will now turn the podium over to Mr. Jerry Yellin. Welcome, Jerry. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Craig.
That's wonderful. Thanks. You want the hand mic?
I guess.
You got it.
Can you hear me? What an honor to be introduced by General Craig McKinley of the Air Force Association, of which I am a member. I stand here today representing 16 million people, ordinary people, who served our country in war between 1941 and 1945. I graduated from high school in June of 1941 after going through the Depression, had a scholarship to school but no money, and I postponed my entrance into college to the spring of 1942. December 7th came along, and that changed my plans. When I was a young guy, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, I delivered Collier's and Liberty magazines to get brownies, greenies, and brownies coupons that I turned into model airplanes from World War I. I knew them all, and I loved what I read and about the exploits of the fighter pilots from World War I. And then my hero became the Flying Tigers in 1939 when they flew P-40s in China, General Chennault. I'm going to be with his granddaughter, Nell Chennault, tonight at the Chinese embassy, actually. And that was my inspiration to try and become a fighter pilot in World War II on my 18th birthday, 2 months after Pearl Harbor, February 15th, 1942. The requirements were 2 years of college or pass an equivalent exam. I took the physical. I passed the mental, took the physical, flunked the eye test. I had 20/30 vision in one eye. And the doctor told me, go home, stay in a dark room, eat a lot of carrots, and come back and take the test again. And I did that. But my mother was a member of the draft board, and I prevailed upon her to bring me the eye chart, which I memorized, and I was accepted, inducted into the Army Air Corps as a cadet in waiting at Fort Dix in August of 1942, went to classification in Nashville, Tennessee, wound up in pre-flight at Santa Ana, and then soloed 1 week into my 19th year on February 22nd in a Stearman at Thunderbird Field in Phoenix, Arizona. There are 2.8 million people in Phoenix today. When I was there were 60,000 people living in Maricopa County. And I did my cross-country, landed in a Stearman, solo, at the crossroads of Tempe, Mesa, and Chandler, which is now one big megapolis. There was nobody living in Arizona. My instructor was about 35 years old, told me, give me all your money, we're gonna buy land here, because everybody who goes through is gonna wanna come back. But I was making $75 a month. It wasn't very much, didn't go very far. I wound up at Luke Field and graduated with the class of 43H in August of 1943. And just before we were graduating, they gave us a final 6.4. That was the number of the physical, and I flunked the eye test. They changed the chart. The Major Lee, told me, you've come so far, we'll let you graduate with your class, but we'll put you in transports. I said, sir, I'm a fighter pilot. I already had 10 hours in a P-40. He said, not if I have anything to do with it. I said, who can do something? He said, the Commandant of Cadets. And I asked, how can I get to see him? He said, ask me. I said, sir, I'd like to see the Commandant of Cadets. And I wound up in front of a chicken colonel, we called him, wearing a chicken on his wings. And he looked up and he asked me what he could do for me, Yellin. And I said, sir, they want to make me a transport pilot, and I'm a fighter pilot. And he said, anybody that's got the dirty word enough to come to see me, you're a fighter pilot. I graduated with my class. 28 of us were assigned to go to Hawaii to get 50 hours in a P-40 with the 78th Fighter Squadron, and I remained with the 78th. They kept us, 5 of us, 4 guys from Iowa and me from New Jersey. And we flew P-40s off of Haleiwa, on the beach, off of a metal strip. We became pilots. We would fly an airplane, but we became fighter pilots, flying P-40s and P-47s. And eventually we wound up with P-51s. Each airplane that I flew in training, of course, had an instructor sitting in front of me. We shot landings and did spins and everything that you do in training through an instructor. But that first flight in the P-40, you're all alone. And that was the scariest flight that I made when I was an aviation cadet. I flew with 16 guys in total that didn't come back. 5 of them were killed in training. I know their names, I know how they died. It never bothered me. I was a very, very cocky, young 19-year-old pilot. In December of 1944, we boarded a Sitco Bay, a Jeep carrier, to go to Guam with our P-51s. We offloaded, flew to Saipan, and on March 7th, the 15th Fighter Group flew to Iwo Jima, 8 square miles of land in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, where 90,000 soldiers were fighting, 67,000 American Marines and 23,000 Japanese. When I landed and followed the Follow Me Jeep, I passed mounds and mounds and mounds of dead Japanese soldiers being pushed into mass graves. And the sights and the sounds and the smells of war remain with me to this day. On April 7th, I was lucky enough to fly on the very first mission, land-based mission ever flown over Japan. It was a 3.5-hour flight on the wing of a B-29. We had no navigation equipment at all in our airplane. We dropped our wing tanks, and I flew over Tokyo as 150 bombers dropped their bombs. And I watched little fires become big fires, and square miles of Tokyo were burning. And it never bothered me one bit that we were doing this to our enemy. I thought then, as I think now, that the pure purpose of war is to kill your enemy. And we were doing that. I flew with 11 guys who didn't come back from Japan in these missions. That's a picture of me taken on June 1, 1945, with Danny Mathis from North Augusta, South Carolina, who was my wingman on May 30th when we shared a kill of a 0. And I came back, I had a toothache. I went to the dentist, they pulled 4 wisdom teeth, and they grounded me. I was supposed to lead a flight to Osaka, escorting B-29s over Osaka on June 1. They gave Danny my airplane, the Dar-ER, as an element leader, and they could see me briefing him as he had never flown in a lead position before. That picture was taken an hour before takeoff on June 1. An hour after takeoff, the planes from the 15th Fighter Group and other groups from the airfield, 2nd Airfield on Iwo Jima, were led by a B-29 into a storm, and some Yardbird pilots flying high cover above all the other airplanes, spun out and took down 27 fighter planes in a mid-air collision on June 1, 1945. Danny was killed in my airplane, a Dar-ER, and Jack Nelson from the 78th. And I was really angry at Danny because I now did not have a weapon to fly. It was a difficult time for us for the air war over Japan. Iwo Jima suffered, 28,000 people died, 21,000 Japanese and nearly 7,000 Marines. I flew 19 missions, 19 long-range missions. On June, Curtis LeMay took over the 20th Air Force, 20th Bomber Command, and stopped the daylight raids over Japan because they were losing 35–40% of casualties. Iwo Jima had 2,200 B-29s make emergency landings from the time that the airfields were taken, 2,200 airplanes with 11 or 12 men in each one of those planes. We watched several times as crews bailed out because they couldn't land. We watched as fires, B-29s landed, caught on fire. And it was something that remains to me to this day. The air power that we used to win the war was necessary. The war was necessary. Our mission was necessary. And I enjoyed, literally, every moment that I was in uniform fighting for my country. On August 6th, I came back from a strafing mission, and a fellow by the name of Phil Marr from Brooklyn, New York, jumped on my wing as my propeller was winding down. He said, "We dropped one bomb and wiped out a city. The war's over." And I said, "What are you smoking? I want some." Of course, there was smoking those days, but this is the group that flew on the very first mission on April 7th, 1945. Jim Tapp, whose signature up there at 2010 Vision, he shot down 4 Japanese Zeros on April 7th. And on April 12th, he got his 5th, became the first air race over Japan. And on April 12th, his wingman was Fred White. And Fred White's airplane ingested the shells from Jim Tapp's plane. He was leaking coolant. Tapp flew him over to a submarine, and White bailed out, and his chute never opened. He was the first casualty in combat. And I'm standing with 2 guys from Iowa. Standing on my left is Al Sharon from Waterloo, Iowa, and Bob Roseberry is on the other side from Cedar Falls. Al Sharon went to school in Waterloo with some of the Sullivan brothers. And on 8 July, he called in on a strafing mission. I'm hit, and I can't see, and he was gone. And the second guy kneeling on the left, on the bottom row, is Bob Pudgy Carr from Santa Fe, New Mexico. He was my tent mate, and he didn't come back on that day. All in all, it was difficult. On August 13th, knowing that the war was over, we were called to a briefing. And in that briefing, we were told that we were going to fly again on August 14th. Jim Tapp was the commanding officer. He was asked why. He said, we said, the war is over. They're negotiating for peace. He said, we have to keep them honest. And on August, that day, at the briefing, my wingman, to-be, Phil Schlomberg, leaned over at me and said, "Captain, if we go, I'm not coming back." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "If we go, I just have a feeling I'm not coming back." I went to Tapp. I went to Doc Lewis, the flight surgeon. There was no replacement. I told him on takeoff, the morning of the takeoff of August 14th, just stay on my wing. They're probably going to abort. We were given a code word, Ohio, that the war would be over and we'd abort. We needed wing tanks to get to Japan. And we had Dumbos, airplanes flying. We had destroyers in the ocean and submarines as we got closer. When we got near Japan on August 14th, no one had heard the code word Ohio. We dropped our wing tanks, strafed airfields around Tokyo. We needed 90 gallons of fuel to get back to Iwo Jima, 90 gallons. Someone called 90 gallons, the whole squadron took off and flew out. I was leading a flight. I looked over, gave Phil Schlomberg on my wing a thumbs up. He gave me a thumbs up back. I took the flight into some clouds on the way out to sea. When I came out of the clouds, Schlomberg was gone. No visual, no radio contact, just gone. When we got back to Iwo Jima, the war had been over for 3 hours. And he was literally the last man killed on a fighter mission in Japan, over Japan. And that was the last mission that was flown. So I had the honor of flying the first, 17 in between, and the last mission in World War II. I was discharged as a captain in December of 1945. And my first mission was go to Brooklyn, New York, to see Phil Schlomberg's mother and sisters. She didn't want to see me, but her children did. And while I was there, I gave them Phil's wings, his lieutenant bars, and the emblem from his cap. And when I was leaving, his mother said to me, "It should have been you who was killed, Captain, not my son Philip. I hope you never sleep a night in your life like I can't sleep now." And I couldn't get over that for hours. I sat on their stoop. The war for me was exhilarating. I was a star. I was a fighter pilot. I was 19 years old, 20 years old, and then 21 years old. I joined the Air National Guard in February of 1945, in February 1946, and I knew that if I continued to fly, that I was going to get killed. I was going to die, either by choice or by chance. And I lived for 30 years with addictive behavior, seriously addictive behavior. I met and married a young woman. I met a woman 19 years old on Good Friday, 1949. We got engaged on May 30th and married on October 22nd, 1949. Next month, we'll celebrate our 64th anniversary. But I was damaged goods until I learned transcendental meditation and got my life back in 1975. Transcendental meditation is something that I believe in because it's a natural process. It has nothing to do with religion or belief. It's just how the brain functions. I started Operation Warrior Wellness with the David Lynch Foundation in 2010 after a young friend of mine who had been in the military for 7 years and served in Bosnia put a .45 to his head and killed himself in front of his mother's house. So the David Lynch Foundation now has Operation Warrior Wellness, supporting veterans across the country and doing a DoD study for $3 million now to prove that we don't have to spend $1.5 billion of the government's money every month for antipsychotic and antidepressant drugs, which could conceivably go on for 600 or 700 months to take care of the current 500, 600, or 700,000 young veterans and their families who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm also the spokesman for Spirit of 45 Day. Spirit of 45, led by Congressman Susan Collins and Senator Lautenberg and Senator Inouye, unanimously had a resolution passed through Congress recognizing the second Sunday in August as Spirit of 45 Day. Now, what is the Spirit of 45? 1940, President Roosevelt made the Four Freedoms speech, where he said that America has 4 freedoms: the freedom of worship, the freedom of expression, the freedom from want, and the freedom from fear. We don't have that in our country today. So we, Warren Haig and I, and hundreds of people throughout this country, Major League Baseball teams observe the day, are hoping to make Spirit of 45 a part of what we do with the Air Force Association and with their approval to raise the awareness of what spirit of 45 meant to me and to my generation. There aren't too many of us left. This is Commander Roscoe Brown, one of the first guys from the Tuskegee Airmen, and this is what he had to say about Spirit of 45.
Give me the mic.
Yeah, it's probably better.
Like all young people at that time, we wanted to serve our nation because we believed in what it stood for. All young people at that time, I hope we wanted to serve our nation, especially young people, what it stood for, how we defended freedom.
Sorry about that. I'm teeing this up. Some of you already, I'm sure, met Dr. Roscoe Brown. He was a squadron commander for the Tuskegee Airmen, so we'll give him another shot here. He's up from New York.
I am Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr. I served in World War II. I was a member of the Tuskegee Airmen, America's first African-American fighter pilots. Like all young people at that time, we wanted to serve our nation because we believed in what it stood for and what it could be. I hope that all Americans, especially young people, will remember how we defended freedom, how we rebuilt the world, and how we made America the great country that it is. Today, America faces new challenges. I hope that our example, our spirit, will help Americans of all backgrounds to work together to meet these challenges through service to others. I remember the joy and pride we all felt on August 14th, 1945, the day the war ended. I hope that all Americans will take a moment every year on the second Sunday in August to remember that day, to honor those who served and those who stood behind us, to remember the sacrifice of those who never came home, and to keep the spirit of 45 alive.
Tuskegee Airmen were, is this working? Yeah. The Tuskegee Airmen were the only group of airmen that went to Europe to fly escort for bombers who, when they first went there, nobody wanted to have anything to do with them, but they were ordered, the bombing commands were ordered to have them escort. They flew many, many missions and were the only unit that I know of, maybe in the history of the air power war, that never lost one bomber. That's what the Spirit of 45 wants to do, is to bring back what we had when 16 million of us, 10% of the nation, and those who stayed at home, were all united in one effort. Our effort with the cooperation, for us to cooperate with the AFA to enlarge the membership of the Air Force Association on a grassroots program, hopefully to get 1 million young people involved across the country, each one giving $45 a year to preserve every single flyable World War II aircraft that we can for 100 years in perpetuity, and to expand the Cyber Patriot program that they have so successfully started and now have in 1,500 schools, beyond what they ever dreamed of. Because those who are exhibiting in this convention, the companies are going to be here. The people may not be here. The ideas are beyond the scope of my imagination, possibly yours too. But the people to run the companies have to be educated scientifically, mathematically, in every single way in our country, and it's not happening. So we're going to take the opportunity to do that. We're going to take the opportunity to bring Cyber Patriot program to every school in the nation. I'm hoping for 3 things in my life, actually for 4 things in my life. I'll be 90 in February. One of my dreams is to bring the Cyber Patriot program. Another is to fund every World War II airplane. Another is to come back here next year and the year after and the year after and make progress reports. And when I applied for entry into the military cemetery in Des Moines, Iowa, and was accepted, I told the lady in charge, a retired brigadier general, that I had a dream. She says, "What's your dream?" I said, "I would like to be the last man standing in World War II." So I eat well, I exercise regularly, stay married to the same woman, and I hope that I can fulfill my dreams. And it's been an honor, an absolute honor, to be a part of this convention this year. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jerry. Why don't we, I know some of you have questions. Would some of you like to raise your hands and ask a question of Jerry? Please, we'll start here and then work up to the front row.
Captain Yellin, did you ever fly against Subaru Sakai, the Japanese ace?
No, I've been to Japan 30 or 35 times. My youngest son married the daughter of a kamikaze pilot in 1988. I hated him, he hated me. We spent, after the wedding, we spent 3 hours in a ryokan in Shimoda. We stayed in the same suite that Jimmy Carter and his wife stayed in when they were on an official visit to Japan. And we talked for 3 hours to a translator. And when we came out, he said in Japanese to the translator that he never knew that other people had the same feelings about education, about family, about religion, spiritual things. And we bonded and became family. He passed away last year. His name was Taro Yamakawa. And we have 3 grandchildren. I have 3 half-Japanese grandchildren raised in Japan. Went there this year in September so that I could tell them my side of my family as adults. Our oldest grandson, my son gave them names that could be used in English. My oldest grandson's name is Kentaro. When he was 5 or 6 or 7 years old, we went to Japan, and I used to like to go to the local 7-Eleven, not called 7-Eleven, to buy some sushi and some beer. And one day I was shopping with him, and when I was finished, he looked up at me, he says, "Grandpa," he said, "buy me a toy." I said, "Ken, I don't have any money." He says, "Grandpa, buy me a book." I said, "Ken, I don't have any money." He says, "Grandpa, buy me some ice cream." I said, "Ken, let's go, we're going home." About 3 years later, we were back in Japan, and he wasn't doing his homework. His mother and father couldn't get him through his homework. So I put my arm around his shoulder, and I said, "Ken, if you go into your room and do your homework, I'll take you to the store and I'll buy you a toy." "Show me your money, Grandpa." Now, he just is graduating this month with his master's degree in physics from Hokkaido University, which is the MIT of Japan, and was one of 20,000 applicants for 100 jobs at a very prestigious Japanese company. He got one of the jobs. His younger brother's name is Simon. There's a Sai, S-A-I, and M-O-N, Japanese characters called Simon. That was my father's name. And he just graduated, or will graduate, even though he's not going to be there, from University of City of London, a 4-year course in philosophy that he studied for 2 years of the 3 years he was there in Latin, as on the dean list, and was awarded a full scholarship for his master's at Oxford University. So the father wasn't too far wrong about, our common heritage of grandchildren.
That's great.
But I've never flown an airplane in Japan, never been to any airfield in Japan.
We have one here, and Bernie will be our last. Please.
Thank you for your great service, Captain Yellin. Tell us about when you came back. When did you first experience PTSD? You didn't call it then, didn't know what it was. But what was that like for you?
When I came home, I spoke a language with words that you could never speak in public or in your family. I had nothing to say to anybody about the experience that I had. I became a loner within myself, deeply within myself. And every night that I went to sleep, I had dreams about the guys who were killed. Was Fred White alive when he was bailing out? I bailed out of a P-40 and spent 9 hours in a one-man life raft. His chute never opened. What was it like for Danny Mathis, or Al Sharon, or Ed Green, who got into a flat spin in a P-47 and couldn't get out? I was standing on a bellows field, and a young sailor asked me, "Do you know Bob Ferris?" And I said, "Yes." And Bob Downs, the captain, was doing a 16-ship string acrobatics in P-51. As I said, "Bob Ferris, your brother, is the last man in that 16-ship formation," that plane exploded into little pieces and floated down the aluminum. And every night I had dreams for years and years and years about those guys, what it was like to die. And I wanted to die. I never had a diagnosis. I never went to a doctor. I just had addictive behavior. I played golf 6 days, 7 days a week, 5 days a week. The days I wasn't playing, I was practicing or fixing my clubs. I couldn't hold a job. I was married. I had 4 children. I moved 25 times in 30 years. I was just a restless, non-human being with a family to support, and I couldn't support them. I gambled on a golf course. That's how I support. They never knew that I didn't go to work. They knew nothing. And then in 1975, my wife saw Maharishi Mahesh Yogi on Mike Douglas's show, and she said she wanted to learn how to meditate. And she learned, and I learned in self-defense. And that's what happened to me with post-traumatic stress disorder. So I can't tell you, I can't answer your question, except to say that I was damaged goods from the good that I did as an American citizen, just as these young people, for the good that they've done for American citizenry, and they're suffering, and their families are suffering. I started Wounded Warrior, Operation Warrior Wellness in 2010, when I read a front headline paper, the Des Moines Register, with headlines this big that said the war on PTSD. And it talked about a former sheriff's deputy from Ames, Iowa, actually from Colo, Iowa, who was a sheriff's deputy in Ames, who spent 57 days in Afghanistan and had an incredible incident where he was the only American holding a 3-year-old dead Afghan girl in the town that she was killed in, and he was almost killed, and he came home, and 3 days or 4 days after he came home, he put a .45 to his head, but never pulled the trigger because somebody grabbed the gun away from him. That was the story. And he learned TM, Luke Jensen. The commandant, the chairman of the board of the Iowa Committee for Veterans Affairs, Todd Jacobus, full colonel, has learned TM. And we have teachers all over the country that are ready to teach. It costs $1,000 to learn something for one lifetime, $1,000. If there are 3 million people that served in Iraq and Afghanistan, that's 2 months for the 3 million people, 2 months of what they're spending every month to give something to someone that they can hold on to themselves. They don't have to change their clothing. They don't have to change their lifestyle. They don't have to change their religion. They don't have to change their thought process. They just have to learn a mantra and how to use it to relieve the stress that they're going through. That's it.
Thanks, Jerry. Bernie Scotch.
Yes, sir. And I'm amazed. The brief time we got to spend yesterday, Jerry, the brief time today, you're just amazing, and you're a hero to all of us, I'm sure. Very briefly, who was Dory R? How did you...
Doris Rosen, I have to share one story if I have time. Doris Rosen was a lady that I met when I was an aviation cadet who was a friend of my mother's in New Jersey, used to play mahjong together, had a friend who moved to California. And this Doris Rosen was 18 years old, and I was 18 years old when I got to California. And so I told her I was going to name my airplane after her. Well, I don't know if you know this, but there was a Broadway show called Wing Victory, where every Hollywood star that was in the military performed. They broke Wing Victory down into a group called Wing Pigeons. And when I graduated flying school, I had 10 days to get home, came home for a day, went back, was assigned to Camp Stoneham in Pittsburgh, California, to take empty 50-gallon drums of gasoline drums on a merchant marine, and I was in charge of that. And the Wing Victory Group of George Jessel, John Bowles, and a young lady whom I've forgotten her name at the moment, but she was a starlet. And she and I went to the top of the Mott Coppins Hotel after the show, Benita Granville. And Benita Granville is sitting across from me, and she's looking at me, and she's starting to think, and she comes out with, you know, Lieutenant, every star in Hollywood, Rita Hayworth and Betty Grable, they all have airplanes named after them. I would do anything, but anything, to have an airplane named after me. And my remark was, I've already promised the name to somebody else. So that's how smart I was.
That's great.
Thank you.
Well, folks, if you haven't enjoyed this, you know, you're not rooted in aviation history. Jerry, thanks for being with us. It's an honor. It was a pleasure to meet you and Warren. We got a little book for you. I'm going to give you my coin first, but how many people in here knew John Steinbeck was hired by the Army Air Corps to write a book? We all know of Mice and Men and Grapes of Wrath, but Steinbeck wrote a book about bomber pilots. Now, since you protected these guys all your life, I want you to have this on behalf of George Molnar and our entire AFA staff. Thanks for all you've done. Thanks for keeping history alive. We love you.
Thanks for letting me be here.
Thanks. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.